The arena fell silent as the last challenger hit the ground. Kethvar stood over the fallen crystalline warrior, his forearms relaxed at his sides. Blue blood dripped from his claws onto the metal floor. The crowd of aliens from across the galaxy watched in silence. They had seen this before. They would see it again. Kethvar was 8 feet tall with gray skin like armor. His body was covered in scars from battles that would have killed most beings. Metal parts replaced pieces of his original body. His eyes glowed red in the arena lights. He had been fighting for 300 years. He had never lost. The announcer's voice boomed across the arena. Winner by knockout, Kethvar the Undefeated. His record stands at 847 wins, 0 losses. The crowd cheered, but Kethvar felt nothing. Another victory. Another species defeated. The crystalline had been strong, made of living diamond that could cut through steel. But like all the others, they fought with logic. They had patterns. They were predictable. Kethvar walked toward the exit, his heavy feet making the floor shake. He thought about all the species he had fought. The Veltar could read minds, but their thoughts were slow. The Morphians could change shape, but they always chose the same battle forms. The Luxari were made of pure energy, but they followed the same attack sequences every time. Every species in the galaxy followed rules. They fought to survive. They used their natural abilities. They made logical choices. This made them easy to defeat once you learned their patterns. As Kethvar reached the arena door, the announcer spoke again. "Attention, fight fans! We have exciting news! A new challenger has registered for next week's match." Kethvar stopped walking. New challengers were rare. Most species had already sent their best warriors to face him. Most had failed. The challenger comes from a recently discovered species called humans. They are from a planet called Earth in the Outer Rim territories. The crowd made confused noises. Kethvar had never heard of humans. In 300 years of fighting, he had faced warriors from over 200 worlds. If he did not know this species, they must be very new to space travel. Humans have only had faster-than-light travel for 50 Earth years, the announcer continued. They are considered a minor species by the Galactic Federation, but they have requested a champions match, according to their right as Federation members. Kethvar felt curious. A new species meant new abilities to learn about, new fighting styles to analyze, new patterns to break. He had been getting bored with the same old challenges. Maybe these humans would be interesting for a few minutes. He walked to the arena's information center. A small robot handed him a datapad with information about his new opponent. The file was very thin. Humans had only been known to the galaxy for 50 years. Most of that time, they had stayed in their home system. The physical data was disappointing. Humans were small, usually between 5 and 6 feet tall. They had soft skin with no natural armor. They had no claws, no energy weapons built into their bodies, no telepathic powers. They could not change shape or fly. They seemed to be one of the weakest species he had ever read about. The file showed pictures of human warriors. They wore metal armor and carried simple weapons that shot metal bullets. Some had mechanical parts, like Kethvar, but theirs looked crude and basic. Their technology seemed hundreds of years behind most galactic civilizations. Kethvar read about their home planet. Earth was a dangerous world, with extreme weather, deadly animals, and natural disasters. Humans had evolved as prey animals, who learned to use tools. They were persistence hunters who chased their food until it collapsed from exhaustion. They were not built for fighting. The warrior felt disappointed. This would be his easiest victory yet. A weak species, with no special abilities, crude technology, and no experience fighting galactic-level opponents. The match would probably last less than 5 minutes. He was about to leave when something in the file caught his attention. Humans spent most of their history fighting each other. Even after they developed space travel, They continued to have wars among themselves. The file mentioned thousands of conflicts over their short recorded history. This was strange. Most intelligent species stopped fighting their own kind once they achieved spaceflight. The galaxy was big enough for everyone. Resources were plentiful. There was no logical reason for a spacefaring civilization to waste energy on internal conflicts. But the file showed that humans had never stopped fighting. They had wars that lasted for years or even decades. They fought over territory, resources, ideas, and sometimes for reasons the galactic researchers could not understand. Kethvar found this interesting but not concerning. A species that fought itself was probably weak from constant internal damage. They would have no experience working together against outside threats. Their champion would be used to fighting other humans, not real galactic warriors. He closed the file and walked toward his living quarters. Tomorrow he would begin preparing for the match. He would study human anatomy and look for weak points. He would review their basic technology to understand their weapons. He would plan how to defeat them quickly and efficiently. As he walked through the corridors of the arena complex, other fighters and staff members bowed their heads in respect. Kethvar was a legend. He had brought honor to his homeworld and fear to his enemies. Young warriors across the galaxy studied his techniques and tried to copy his success. But in his private moments, Kethvar felt empty. He won because he was better, stronger, and more experienced than anyone else. There was no challenge left. Maybe that would change with these humans. Maybe they would surprise him somehow. But looking at their file, he doubted it. They seemed too weak, too primitive, too new to space to offer any real challenge. Kethvar had fought the galaxy's best warriors. He had defeated species with powers beyond imagination. What could one small, soft human possibly do to challenge the undefeated champion? He would find out in 7 days. The arena was full again. Word had spread across the galaxy about the human challenger. Beings from hundreds of worlds had come to watch Kethvar face this unknown species. Most expected a quick victory. Some hoped to see something new. Kethvar stood in his corner of the arena, checking his weapons one final time. His plasma rifle was fully charged. His energy sword hummed with power. His armor was perfect. He had spent the week studying everything known about human anatomy and technology. He was ready. The arena door on the opposite side opened with a loud noise. Kethvar looked across the fighting space, expecting to see a human in primitive armor, carrying crude weapons. What he saw confused him. The human was smaller than he expected. She was a female, maybe 5.5 feet tall. Her armor was light and flexible, not the heavy metal plates he had seen in the files. She carried only basic weapons, a kinetic rifle and a small sidearm. Her left arm was mechanical, but it looked well made, not crude like the pictures had shown. But what confused Kethvar most was her face. She was smiling. The announcer's voice filled the arena. Introducing the human champion, Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth Defense Force. The crowd made various sounds of surprise and interest. Many had never seen a human before. Sarah walked to the center of the arena with relaxed confidence. She moved like someone taking a pleasant walk, not like someone about to fight the galaxy's deadliest warrior. Kethvar approached the center for the traditional pre-fight meeting. Up close, he could see that Sarah had scars on her face and neck. Her mechanical arm had scratches and dents. She had clearly been in fights before. "You are Captain Chen," Kethvar said in standard galactic language. His voice was deep and rough. "That's right," Sarah replied. Her voice was lighter than his, almost cheerful. "You must be the famous Kethvar. I've heard a lot about you." "You have made a mistake coming here," Kethvar said. "I have studied your species. You are weak. This fight will be short." Sarah's smile grew wider. "Maybe, but I didn't come here to win. I came here to learn." This answer made no sense to Kethvar. Why would someone enter a champion's match just to learn? Learning happened in training halls, not in battles to the death. The referee, a floating ethereal being, gave the final instructions. Standard champion rules. Fight until one opponent cannot continue. Begin when the horn sounds. Both fighters returned to their corners. Kethvar activated his armor systems and raised his plasma rifle. Across the arena, Sarah checked her kinetic weapon and stretched her shoulders like she was preparing for exercise. The horn sounded. Kethvar immediately fired 3 plasma bolts at where Sarah had been standing, but she was no longer there. She had moved the instant the horn sounded, rolling behind cover before his first shot was complete. This was expected. Most opponents tried to avoid his opening attack. Kethvar moved to get a better angle and fired again. Sarah rolled out from behind her cover just as he fired, the plasma bolt missing her by inches. But instead of running to new cover, Sarah did something strange. She ran toward him. Kethvar had never seen this tactic before. Running toward a plasma rifle was certain death. He fired again, but Sarah suddenly changed direction, diving to the side at the last second. The bolt passed through empty air. She was now much closer. Too close for the plasma rifle to be most effective. Kethvar dropped it and drew his energy sword. The blade crackled with deadly power as he swung it at Sarah's head. Sarah ducked under the swing and fired her kinetic weapon at point-blank range. The metal bullets hit Kethvar's chest armor and bounced off, but the impacts staggered him slightly. As he recovered his balance, Sarah did something impossible. She threw her rifle at him. Not as a weapon, but as a distraction. While Kethvar's eyes tracked the flying rifle, Sarah grabbed a piece of broken arena equipment and swung it at his legs. The metal bar hit his knee joint, causing his armor to spark. Kethvar swung his sword again, but Sarah was already moving. She rolled under his arm, came up behind him, and jumped onto his back. Her mechanical arm locked around his throat, while her other hand tried to reach his helmet controls. This was not how fights were supposed to go. Opponents faced each other with honor. They used their natural abilities and trained skills. They did not jump on each other like wild animals. Kethvar reached back with 2 of his arms and grabbed Sarah. He threw her across the arena with enough force to break bones. Any other species would have been killed by the impact. Sarah hit the wall hard and fell to the ground. But instead of staying down, she rolled to her feet immediately. Her armor was cracked, and she was bleeding from a cut on her forehead. She should have been finished. Instead, she was laughing. "That was a good throw," she called out. "My turn." Sarah picked up a piece of debris from where she had hit the wall. It was just a chunk of broken metal, not a real weapon. But she threw it at Kethvar's head with surprising accuracy. Kethvar easily blocked the debris with his sword, but while he was distracted, Sarah grabbed something else. She had picked up his plasma rifle. Kethvar expected her to try to shoot him with it. Instead, she did something that made no tactical sense. She reversed the weapon and smashed it against the arena floor, breaking it into pieces. Now neither of them had ranged weapons. "Why did you do that?" Kethvar asked. Destroying weapons made no sense. It helped neither fighter. Sarah wiped blood from her forehead with the back of her hand. "Because this is more fun." Fun. She had said this was fun. Kethvar had fought for 300 years, and no opponent had ever described fighting him as fun. Fear, honor, desperation, duty. These were normal responses. Fun was not normal. The fight continued, and Sarah kept doing things that violated every rule of combat logic. She used parts of the arena as weapons. She ignored injuries that should have slowed her down. She took risks that should have gotten her killed. Most disturbing to Kethvar was her attitude. She smiled when she landed a hit. She laughed when she barely escaped his attacks. She acted like this death match was some kind of game. For the first time in centuries, Kethvar felt something he had almost forgotten. Uncertainty. He had always won because he could predict what his opponents would do. But Sarah's actions made no sense. She fought like someone who had never learned proper combat techniques, or like someone who had learned to fight in ways Kethvar could not understand. The crowd had gone silent. They were watching something they had never seen before. A fight, where the experienced warrior looked confused, and the newcomer looked like she was enjoying herself. Kethvar realized that everything he thought he knew about combat might be wrong, and for the first time in his life, that thought made him afraid. The fight had been going on for 20 minutes. This was already longer than most of Kethvar's battles lasted. He was breathing hard inside his helmet, something that had not happened in years. Sweat ran down his face as he tried to understand Sarah's fighting style. She was fast, but not faster than others he had fought. She was clever, but not more clever than the telepathic species. Her weapons were simple. Her armor was light, and her body was fragile. By every measure, she should have been defeated in the first 5 minutes. But she was still fighting. More than that, she was adapting. Every time Kethvar used a technique, Sarah seemed to learn from it. When he attacked from the left, one, she expected it the next time. When he used his energy sword in a particular pattern, she found ways to counter it. She was turning the fight into a learning experience. For her, Kethvar had landed several solid hits. Sarah's armor was cracked in multiple places. Blood ran from cuts on her arms and face. Her mechanical arms sparked occasionally, where his sword had damaged it. Any reasonable opponent would have surrendered by now. But Sarah kept smiling. "You fight like a Vrex hunter," she said during a brief pause in the action. "I fought one of those on Kepler Station last year. Big, strong, uses all 4 arms in coordinated attacks. But you're better trained." Kethvar was confused. Humans had only been in space for 50 years. How could she have fought a Vrex hunter? The Vrex were from the other side of the galaxy. "You have fought my people before?" he asked. "Oh, yes," Sarah said, wiping blood from her nose. "Humans get around. We're curious. We like to see new places, meet new people, learn new ways to fight." This information was not in any file Kethvar had read. According to galactic records, humans stayed close to their home system. They were supposed to be isolationist and fearful of other species. But Sarah talked like someone who had traveled across the galaxy and fought multiple alien species. How was this possible? Sarah picked up a piece of broken metal from the arena floor. It was sharp on one end, like a crude knife. She held it in her good hand and prepared to attack again. Kethvar raised his energy sword and moved forward. He had finally figured out some of Sarah's patterns. He could predict where she would dodge. He could end this fight now. He swung his sword in a wide arc that would catch Sarah no matter which direction she moved. It was a perfect attack, one that had defeated dozens of champions before. Sarah saw the attack coming. Instead of dodging left or right, she did something impossible. She stepped forward, directly into the path of his sword. Kethvar tried to stop his swing, but it was too late. The energy blade caught Sarah across the chest, cutting through her armor and into her body. She screamed in pain, but did not fall down. Instead, she grabbed his sword arm with both hands and held on. Kethvar stared in shock. Sarah had deliberately let herself be stabbed so she could get close enough to grab him. This was not tactics. This was insanity. "Got you," Sarah said through gritted teeth. Blood ran from the wound in her chest, but she smiled anyway. She still had the metal spike in her mechanical hand. Before Kethvar could react, she drove it into the joint where his arm met his shoulder. Sparks flew from his armor as the spike damaged important systems. Kethvar's left arm went dead. His armor's diagnostics showed critical damage to the servo motors and neural interfaces. Sarah had found the exact weak point that would disable his arm, but she had stabbed herself to do it. Kethvar threw her away from him with his remaining good arms. Sarah hit the ground hard and rolled several times before stopping. She lay still for a moment, blood pooling beneath her. The crowd was completely silent. Many aliens had never seen anything like this. Self-injury for tactical advantage was unheard of in galactic combat sports. It went against every survival instinct known to science. Sarah slowly pushed herself up to her hands and knees. The wound in her chest was serious, but not immediately fatal. Her mechanical arm was completely dead now, hanging useless at her side. She had traded her arm and taken a potentially mortal wound to disable one of Kethvar's arms. In any logical analysis, this was a terrible trade. Kethvar still had 3 working arms and was much stronger than Sarah. She was badly injured and had lost half her fighting capability. But as Sarah stood up, Kethvar felt something he had never experienced before in combat. Fear. Not fear of losing. Not fear of death. But fear of an opponent who would hurt herself to hurt him. Fear of someone who treated mortal wounds like acceptable costs. Fear of a mind that worked in ways he could not understand. That hurt, Sarah said, pressing her good hand against the wound in her chest. But it was worth it. Now, we're more evenly matched. More evenly matched? She had 1 working arm and a serious injury. How was that more even? You are insane, Kethvar said. You deliberately injured yourself. Sometimes you have to take damage to deal damage, Sarah replied. It's basic human tactics. We call it acceptable losses. Acceptable losses. The phrase made Kethvar's blood feel cold. What kind of species considered self-harm an acceptable tactic? Sarah picked up another piece of debris with her good hand. This time, it was a chunk of her own broken armor. She held it like a shield and prepared to attack again. Round 2? She asked. Kethvar realized that his tactical analysis systems were failing. His computer could not process what Sarah had done. The action did not fit any known combat algorithm. His centuries of experience provided no guidance for fighting someone who would deliberately harm themselves. For the first time in 300 years, Kethvar did not know what to do next. Sarah attacked again, moving more slowly now because of her injuries. But her movements were still unpredictable. She used her own pain as a weapon, screaming when she moved to frighten him. She threw her blood in his face to block his vision. Every action she took violated the basic rules of survival. But somehow, each violation gave her a tactical advantage. The fight continued for another 10 minutes. Both fighters were badly injured now. Kethvar had cuts and bruises despite his armor. Sarah could barely stand, held up more by determination than strength. Finally, Sarah collapsed. She fell to her knees, then forward onto her face. Blood spread around her in a growing pool. Kethvar stood over her, waiting for the referee to declare him the winner. But Sarah was still breathing, still conscious, still dangerous. Do you yield? Kethvar asked. Sarah turned her head to look up at him. Even bleeding and broken, she was still smiling. Draw, she whispered. Call it a draw. Before Kethvar could respond, Sarah's good arm moved. She had been lying on top of something, a piece of broken equipment with a power cell. Her mechanical arm might be dead, but the power cell was not. She triggered the cell's emergency discharge. The explosion was small, but at close range it knocked both fighters down. When the smoke cleared, both Sarah and Kethvar were unconscious on the arena floor. The referee declared it an official draw. In 847 fights, Kethvar had never failed to win. Until he met a human. Kethvar woke up in the medical center 3 days later. His body was covered in bandages and connected to healing machines. The doctors had repaired most of his injuries, but they could not repair what had happened to his mind. For the first time in his life, he had not won a fight. The word draw appeared on his official record. To most observers, it looked like a small thing. 1 draw out of 848 matches. Almost perfect. But Kethvar knew the truth. He had not defeated Sarah Chen. A small, injured human with crude weapons and no special abilities had fought him to a standstill. Everything he believed about combat had been proven wrong in 37 minutes. The doctors released him after a week. His body was healed, but his mind was not. He could not stop thinking about the fight, about Sarah's tactics, about the way she had smiled while bleeding. Most of all, he thought about what she had said. Round 2? As if their death match had been practice for something else. Kethvar returned to his quarters in the arena complex. Normally, after a fight, he would rest, train, and prepare for the next challenger. But now he could not focus on training. Instead, he found himself accessing the galactic information networks, searching for everything he could learn about humans. What he found disturbed him. The official files had been wrong about almost everything. Humans had not stayed in their home system. They had spread across dozens of star systems in just 50 years. They had established colonies, trading posts, and military bases throughout the Outer Rim territories. They were everywhere. More troubling, they had been fighting everyone. Not as aggressors, but as defenders, mercenaries, and allies. Human soldiers had fought in conflicts across the galaxy. They hired themselves out to other species as military advisors and shock troops. They were very good at it. Kethvar found reports from dozens of species who had employed human fighters. The reports all said similar things. Humans did not follow standard military doctrine. They improvised constantly. They used tactics that seemed insane but somehow worked. They never gave up, even in hopeless situations. Most importantly, they seemed to enjoy fighting. One report from a crystalline commander was especially disturbing. Human soldiers laugh during combat, it said. They make jokes while under enemy fire. They treat deadly battles like competitive games. This behavior is psychologically damaging to enemy forces, who do not understand how to fight opponents who are having fun trying to kill them. Another report described a human unit that had continued fighting for 3 days after being completely surrounded. They had no food, no water, and no hope of rescue. Any rational species would have surrendered. Instead, the humans had turned their hopeless situation into an advantage, using their desperation to fuel increasingly creative tactics until they broke out of the encirclement. The report noted that the humans had been singing while they fought. Kethvar found military analysis papers written by galactic tacticians who had studied human combat methods. The papers were filled with confusion and frustration. Human tactics violated every known principle of warfare. They attacked when they should defend. They retreated when they should attack. They split their forces when they should concentrate them. They concentrated their forces when they should split them. But somehow, it worked. One paper included a quote from a human military philosopher named Sun Tzu: "All warfare is deception." Another quoted a human general named Patton: "The enemy cannot predict what you will do if you do not know what you are going to do yourself." These quotes revealed something terrifying about human military thinking. They had built their entire approach to combat around unpredictability and controlled chaos. Kethvar dug deeper into human history and found records that made his blood run cold. Humans had been at war with each other for their entire recorded history. Not occasional conflicts, but constant, continuous warfare, spanning thousands of years. They had wars that lasted for decades. They had wars fought over tiny pieces of land. They had wars fought over ideas that other species could not even understand. They had fought wars with weapons that could destroy their entire planet. And they had survived all of it. More than survived, they had thrived. Each war had made them stronger, smarter, more dangerous. They had turned warfare into an art form, then into a science, then into something beyond science. They called it the profession of arms, and they treated it like a sacred duty. Kethvar found records of human conflicts that defied belief. Wars fought in vacuum. Battles lasting years in underground tunnels. Naval combat in acid oceans. Under alien suns. Humans had learned to fight in every possible environment against every possible enemy, including themselves. The most disturbing files were about something humans called special forces. These were elite soldiers trained for impossible missions. They specialized in fighting against overwhelming odds. They were taught to use any weapon, survive in any environment, and accomplish their mission no matter the cost. Sarah Chen had been Special Forces. According to her file, she had been considered average among her peers. Average. Kethvar tried to imagine what an above-average human Special Forces soldier would be like. The thought made him feel sick. He found video records of human training exercises. What he saw challenged everything he understood about rational behavior. Humans deliberately put themselves in deadly situations to prepare for real combat. They practiced fighting while injured, exhausted, and outnumbered. They trained by making their own lives as difficult as possible. One video showed human soldiers learning to fight while being electrocuted. Another showed them practicing combat maneuvers while drowning. They did not just accept pain, they sought it out as a learning experience. The training videos included something called stress inoculation. Humans deliberately exposed themselves to fear, pain, and chaos so they would not be affected by these things during real combat. They had weaponized their own suffering. Kethvar closed the files and sat in his quarters, staring at the wall. Everything he had believed about combat was wrong. Everything he had believed about himself was wrong. He had thought he was the galaxy's greatest warrior because he had won 847 fights. But humans fought thousands of battles in their short lives. They fought their own species, alien species, and the universe itself. They had been preparing for war since before they could walk. Sarah Chen had not come to the arena to win. She had come to learn how to fight someone like Kethvar. The next human who faced him would be ready for his tactics. They would know his weaknesses. And there would be a next human. The files made that clear. Humans never let a challenge go unanswered. If one of them fought you, others would come to learn from the experience. They were studying him. Kethvar realized that his 847 victories meant nothing. He had been fighting civilized species who followed rules and traditions. Species who fought to survive or for honor. Humans fought to become stronger. Every battle was practice for the next battle. Every defeat was a lesson that made them more dangerous. They did not just win wars. They evolved through warfare. For the first time in his life, Kethvar understood what fear really meant. He was not afraid of losing his next fight. He was afraid that his next opponent would be a human who had learned from Sarah Chen's experience. A human who would be ready for him. 3 months had passed since the draw with Sarah Chen. Kethvar had spent that time studying, training, and trying to understand what had happened to him. He had requested files on every human military engagement in galactic history. He had studied their tactics, their weapons, their psychology. The more he learned, the more disturbed he became. Now he stood in the arena again, waiting for his next challenger. When the announcement had come that another human had registered for a champions match, Kethvar had felt something twist in his stomach. Something that might have been fear. The arena was more crowded than ever. Word of the draw with Sarah Chen had spread across the galaxy. Beings from every corner of known space had come to see if lightning would strike twice. The human entrance door opened with its familiar grinding sound. Kethvar watched as his new opponent walked into the arena lights. This human was different from Sarah. He was older, maybe 50 years by human standards. He had gray hair and lines around his eyes. Scars covered his visible skin, like a map of old battles. He moved with the steady confidence of someone who had seen everything the universe could offer. Introducing the human challenger, the announcer called out. Commander Marcus Rodriguez, retired Earth Defense Force Special Operations. Rodriguez walked to the center of the arena without hurry. He carried simple weapons, a kinetic rifle, and a sidearm, but he wore them like they were extensions of his own body. His armor was practical, well used, and showed signs of many repairs. When he reached the center, Rodriguez smiled at Kethvar. It was not Sarah's wild grin of anticipation. This was the calm smile of someone completely comfortable with violence. "You must be the famous Kethvar," Rodriguez said in perfect galactic standard. His voice was steady and warm, like he was greeting an old friend. "You know Captain Chen?" Kethvar asked. "Sarah?" "Sure. We served together for a few years." "Good soldier." She said you were the toughest opponent she'd ever faced. Rodriguez checked his rifle with casual efficiency. "She also said you were holding back." Holding back? Kethvar had fought with everything he had. How could Sarah think he was holding back? "I was not holding back," Kethvar said. Rodriguez chuckled. "That's what she figured you'd say. Humans are funny that way. We don't really know what we're capable of until someone pushes us past our breaking point." He looked around the arena with interest. "Nice place. How many fighters have you killed here?" "9. 9. The question was asked casually, but it made Kethvar uncomfortable. "I do not kill unnecessarily. Most opponents yield when defeat is certain." "Smart policy." Rodriguez agreed. "Death in training is wasteful. You want to learn from your opponents, not silence them permanently." He paused. "Though sometimes killing is the only option." "Training?" Rodriguez was calling this a training exercise? "This is not training," Kethvar said. "This is a champion's match. The highest level of combat sport in the galaxy." Rodriguez looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Son, I've been fighting for 35 years. I've fought in wars that would break your mind. I've killed things that don't exist in your nightmares. This," he gestured at the arena, "this is a friendly sparring match." The casual way Rodriguez talked about killing disturbed Kethvar more than Sarah's wild enthusiasm had. This human treated violence like other people treated routine work. The referee gave the final instructions. As they returned to their corners, Rodriguez called out to Kethvar. "By the way, Sarah wanted me to ask you something. She's been wondering, when you fought the crystalline warriors, did you ever face one that had been in the Kepler War?" Kethvar stopped walking. "The Kepler War was 15 years ago. How would a human know about that?" Rodriguez's smile became wider. "Because we fought in it. Both sides hired human mercenaries. Sarah was on the ground for 6 months, fighting crystalline forces in the asteroid fields. She learned all their combat techniques." The implication hit Kethvar like a physical blow. Sarah had not just studied his species in files. She had fought his people in actual combat. She had known his techniques because she had faced them before. "How many species have you fought?" Kethvar asked. "Me personally? Maybe 30 or 40 different kinds. Humans in general?" Rodriguez shrugged. "Pretty much everyone. We get around." The horn sounded. Rodriguez moved the instant the sound began, but not in the way Kethvar expected. Instead of seeking cover or attacking, he stood perfectly still and began talking. "You know what I learned in 35 years of fighting?" he said conversationally, even as Kethvar raised his plasma rifle. "Every species in the galaxy fights the same way their ancestors did. Crystallines use formation tactics because they're hive minds. Veltar rely on telepathy because that's their natural advantage. Morphians use deception because they're shapeshifters." Kethvar fired 3 plasma bolts. Rodriguez stepped aside from each one without seeming to hurry, continuing to talk as if they were having a peaceful conversation. "But humans? We adapt. Every war teaches us something new. Every enemy shows us a different way to fight." Rodriguez fired his kinetic weapon once. Rodriguez's weapon, any weapon. The bullet hit Kethvar's plasma rifle exactly where the power coupling connected, disabling the weapon instantly. Sarah learned crystalline pack tactics during the Kepler War. "I spent 2 years fighting Veltar telepaths in the Outer Rim. My squad leader served with Morphian shapeshifters during the Meridian Crisis." Kethvar drew his energy sword and charged. Rodriguez did not try to dodge. Instead, he stepped forward to meet the attack, drawing a simple combat knife. The knife should have been useless against an energy sword. But as Kethvar swung his weapon, Rodriguez moved in a way that redirected the blade's energy harmlessly past his body. Then he stepped inside Kethvar's guard and placed the knife against his throat. "That's a Veltar combat technique," Rodriguez said calmly. "They taught it to me while we were fighting their cousins in the Andromeda sector." Kethvar twisted away and swung again. This time, Rodriguez moved like liquid, his body bending in ways that seemed impossible. The energy sword passed through empty air. "Morphean flexibility training," Rodriguez explained. "Spent 6 months learning to fight without bones." For the next 10 minutes, Rodriguez demonstrated combat techniques from dozens of species Kethvar had never heard of. He fought like a crystalline warrior, then like a Veltar telepath, then like something completely alien. But underneath all the borrowed techniques was something uniquely human. Rodriguez was not just copying other fighting styles. He was improving them, taking the best parts of each species' methods and combining them into something new. "The thing about humans," Rodriguez said as he deflected another attack, "is that we don't have any natural combat abilities. No claws, no armor, no energy weapons. So we had to learn from everyone else." He moved suddenly, faster than Kethvar had seen him move before. His knife found a gap in Kethvar's armor, slicing through the joint connections. Kethvar's left arm went numb. "We've been fighting longer than any other species in known space," Rodriguez continued. "While your people were developing honor codes and combat traditions, we were learning how to kill anything that moved." Kethvar tried to back away, but Rodriguez followed him step for step. The human's movements were perfectly controlled, never wasting energy, never making unnecessary motions. "You want to know why Sarah was smiling during your fight?" Rodriguez asked. "Because she was having fun. Humans love a challenge. We've spent our entire history fighting impossible odds and finding ways to win." Rodriguez's knife found another armor joint. Kethvar's right leg buckled as the servo motors failed. "But you know what the really scary part is?" Rodriguez said, as Kethvar fell to one knee. "Sarah wasn't trying to beat you. None of us are here to win championships or prove how tough we are." The knife touched Kethvar's throat again, right where his helmet met his chest armor. "We're here to learn how to fight people like you. Because somewhere out in the dark between the stars, there are things that want to hurt humanity. And when they come for us, we need to be ready." Rodriguez stepped back and lowered his knife. "I yield," he said to the referee. The crowd made confused sounds. Rodriguez had clearly won the fight. Kethvar was disabled and helpless. But the human had surrendered. "Why?" Kethvar gasped. Rodriguez smiled that same calm smile. "Because I got what I came for. I know how to fight you now. Next time we meet something like you in a real war, my people will be ready." As medical teams rushed onto the arena floor, Rodriguez knelt beside Kethvar. "You're a good warrior," he said quietly. "But you fight like someone who's never been afraid. Humans, we've been afraid since we first looked up at the night sky. Fear taught us that the universe is full of things that want to kill us." Rodriguez stood up and began walking toward the exit. "The difference is, we decided to become scarier than anything else out there." Kethvar lay on the arena floor, his armor sparking and his body refusing to move. But the physical damage was nothing compared to what had happened to his mind. For 847 fights, he had been the galaxy's apex predator. He had believed himself to be the ultimate warrior, refined by centuries of combat into the perfect fighting machine. Now he understood the truth. He had been fighting civilized species who approached combat as a sport, an art, or a duty. Kethvar had been a large fish in a small pond. Humans were sharks from an ocean he had never imagined existed. As the medical teams worked on his injuries, Kethvar felt something he had never experienced before. His hands were shaking, not from damage to his nervous system, but from a deep, primal fear that came from somewhere beyond conscious thought. For the first time in his life, the galaxy's greatest warrior was quivering. Somewhere in the crowd, he could hear humans laughing and talking about the fight like it had been entertainment. They discussed Rodriguez's techniques with the casual expertise of people who understood violence in ways Kethvar was only beginning to comprehend. They were everywhere. Learning, adapting, preparing. And they were just getting started.